All right, this video is on writing y as a function of x. Sounds a little confusing, but you'll see what I mean when we get started. All right, the first thing I want you to do is pause it. Go ahead and graph this line and find its slope, and then hit play to check your work. All right, so your graph should have looked something like this. I had a point there. Okay, because you had some points. If you plugged in 0 for x, you got 2. Plug in 1, you get 6. You plug in 2, you get 10. Maybe put -1 in there, doesn't really matter. Okay, and your slope, you can either count or you could do the subtraction. Either way, you see that's going up 4 and over 1. Okay, so our slope is 4 over 1 or just 4. Now, look closely at this equation. Do we notice that number anywhere else? Hopefully you said right there, the coefficient of x. That is not a coincidence. That will always be the slope. The coefficient of x is always the slope. Okay, that's going to be super helpful for us. And so let's talk about that. All right, so this is an equation in slope-intercept form. It's the kind of equations we've seen most often that I've given you. And when it's called slope-intercept form because the coefficient of x is the slope. And then the other number is what's called the y-intercept. Now, think about what intercept means, right? Like if you intercept a ball or something in a sport game, it means you get it. You cross the path and you get it, okay? And so you're crossing that path. So on here, our y-intercept is 2. You see that? Well, y-intercept is where it hits the y-axis. Look, it hits the y-axis at 2. So that is the y-intercept. So this form of equation is very helpful, slope-intercept form, okay? This is a specific one, but in general, you'll see it written as y equals mx plus b, okay? Remember, m is slope, crazy m for slope, and just as crazy, for some reason, b stands for the y-intercept. I have no idea why it's a b, but there you go. Maybe they ran out of letters to use, okay? So y equals mx plus b is slope-intercept form, very common form. Get used to thinking about y equals mx plus b, okay? All right, so this is going to be super helpful when it comes to graphing, okay? Remember in the past we've used a table to graph. That works, but it is a little long. Remember in the last lesson on slope, we learned how to plot a graph if we have a starting point and we have the slope. Well, now we have a starting point, now we have a slope. Our starting point is our y-intercept, okay? So starting point is the y-intercept. So in this case, that's 3, right? So remember the y-intercept is on the y-axis. So on the y-axis at 3 is our starting point. So there's the point right there, okay? It's going to be 0, 3. Clearly, it's just whatever x equals 0. You plug that in, and you get 0, 3. But just look, and you see that your starting point is 3. And then remember, our directions is the slope. Slope gives us directions to all the other points. So our directions is the slope. In this case, -2. So remember, slope is rise over run. So I'm going to write that as -2 over 1. That's how I'd write that as a fraction. So that means I go down 2. So starting at my starting point, I go down 1, 2 over 1. And there's another point. Down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, etc., and that's my line. So that's how you can graph a linear equation using slope-intercept form. It's another way to graph other than using the table. And honestly, I think it's a much easier way to graph, okay? You're giving your starting point, you're giving your slope, and you use both of those to graph. All right, so I want you to identify the y-intercept, identify the slope, and then attempt to graph this without making a table, but using the slope and the y-intercept. Then hit play to check your work. All right, so my y-intercept, my b, which is my starting point, is -2 this time, okay? So that means I'm starting on the y-axis at -2. 0, -2 is my starting point, okay? My slope, which is m, remember there is m, is 3, which I'm going to write as 3 over 1. So that means I'm going up 3 over 1, up 3 over 1. I could keep going, but I'm not. I'm just going to connect my dots and be done with it, okay? Much, much faster. You know, so that was about less than a minute to do it, as opposed to using a table. So using your slope and your y-intercept. The key point is don't get them mixed up, okay? So remember, the number being added or subtracted to the variable is your y-intercept, and it was subtracted, so that's why it's a -2. And then the coefficient of your x is the slope, okay? You start with the b, because it comes first in the alphabet, it's your starting point, and the slope is your directions to the next point. All right, go ahead and try this one on your own. It's a little tricky, but see if you can pick it up, and then hit play to check your work. All right, so your b for this one, well, there's nothing there, right? There's nothing being added or subtracted to x, so that means my b is 0. That means my starting point is the origin, okay? So hopefully you figured that out. Your slope is 2/3, so that means I'm going up 2 and over 3 every time I move, up 2, over 3, and I connect my dots. So that's the graph of 2/3 x. All right, so if your equation is not in slope-intercept form, it pays to turn it into it because it is so much easier to graph that way, okay? So remember, slope-intercept form is the form of y equals mx plus b. So y needs to be by itself, x needs to be on the other side, okay? So right now, y is definitely not by itself. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, my goal is to isolate y. Okay, so this is just like solving any other type of equation. So I need to get rid of the 2x and the 4. Just like I've done on my solving equations, I'm first going to get rid of the thing being added to y. So what's being added to y is 2x. To get rid of it, I'm going to add -2x, the entire -2x. So 2x plus -2x, it's gone. And if I add -2x over here, okay, on this side of the equation, those aren't like terms. They cannot combine. So I'm just going to write it as -2x plus 12. Okay, those can't combine, so they're just both on the same side together, hanging out. They're buddies, okay? On the other side, I still have my 4y. So that's step 1. Step 2, get rid of the 4. This is just like the other steps we've done before. To get rid of the 4, the coefficient, you do the reciprocal of it. So it cancels out. Now this is the tricky part. 1/4, it can't just multiply by one thing on the right side. It has to multiply by all of this. So 1/4 is multiplying by everything over there. You might have guessed it. That means it's distributing. Okay? So while I have y by itself over here, I have 1/4 times -2. So that's -2 over 4x. Or if I simplify that, -1/2. Plus 12 over 4. Again, if I simplify that, it's 3. Okay, so that's solving my equation for y, turning it into slope-intercept form. And again, the reason we want to do that is now I know my slope is -1/2, because it's that coefficient of x, and my y-intercept is 3, because it's that number being added to the x. All right, so let's practice turning into slope-intercept form. Now remember, the trickiest part is going to be this part right here, this distributing part, okay? Because that 1/4 needs to be multiplied by each piece, each term that's over on that side of the equation. All right, so go ahead and try this one on your own. Remember, your goal is to isolate y, okay? All right, so the only thing I need to get rid of on this one is the 3. So to get rid of the 3, I do the reciprocal. That will cancel it out. And then this is where I need to distribute, right? The 1/3 needs to multiply by both terms over here, okay? So I end up with just y on that side. 1/3 times 6, or -6, is -6 over 3, right? But that would simplify to -2. X plus 9 times 1/3, right? Because these are both over 1. Make sure you're thinking about it that right way, right? Would be 9 over 3. Which that simplifies just to 3. So there's my equation solved for y. So now I see that my slope is -2 and my y-intercept is 3. All right, go ahead and pause it, try this one on your own, and then hit play to check your work. All All right, so this one, I'm gonna change any minuses to plus negatives, just like we did when we were solving equations before. So I have two things to get rid of. So the first thing we get rid of is what's being added to the y. Because remember our goal, we're isolating y. So it's negative 6x, I'm gonna add positive 6x. So this is gone over here. On the right side, it's 6x plus 0. Now, do I really need to write plus 0? If you wrote it, it's not wrong, but you really don't need it. So it's really just 6x over there, right? And 5y over here. Now, I need to get rid of the 5. So I'm going to do the reciprocal. Those cancels out. And now, since there's only one term over here, I only have to multiply it by 1/5. So I end up getting y equals 6 over 5x, right? Because it was 6 over 1 times 1 over 5, so 6 over 5x. And that's it. Okay, that's solving for y. So that means my slope is 6/5, and that means my y-intercept is 0. That means it's going to start at the origin, okay? So my y-intercept is 0. So I'm going to put it all together now. I want you to solve for y, find the slope and the y-intercept, and then use those to graph it, okay? So go ahead and pause it, try it on your own, and then hit play to check your work to see how you did. All right, so solving for y. So first I need to add x to both sides to get rid of it. So I have 3y equals x plus negative 24. Then I need to get rid of the 3. So I do the reciprocal. And I remember I multiply by both things over here. So that ends up being y equals, so it's a third x, because it's just a third times x, plus negative 24 over 3 would simplify to negative 8. All right, so I solved for y. So that means my slope is 1/3, and my y-intercept is negative 8. So remember, your y-intercept is your starting point. So I have a point at negative 8, and my slope is my directions. I go up 1 over 3, up 1 over 3, up 1 over 3. And my graph looks something like this, okay? If you had some trouble with it, that's fine. This is the first time we've tried this. Let's do another one. So same thing, solve for y. You're solving for y. Identify the slope and the y-intercept, and then graph. All right, so this one, I put a little trick on you. I put the y second, so hopefully you realize that. So I'm adding negative 4x to both sides. So that makes it negative 4x plus negative 8 over here, and negative 2y over here. Now to get rid of the negative 2, 1 over negative 2, 1 over negative 2. Now don't forget, it's distributing, okay? So these are both over 1. So I end up with y equals negative 4 over negative 2 is 2x, plus negative 8 over negative 2 is 4. So my slope is 2, or 2 over 1, and my y-intercept is 4. So that makes my starting point 4. I'm going up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1, up 2 over 1. Connect my dots, and that's my line. All right, let's do one more practice to see how you're doing. So go ahead and try this one, and then hit play to check your work. All right, so this one, I'm going to rewrite a couple things. There you go. All I need to get rid of is the negative 2. So 1 over negative 2, we'll cancel it out. 1 over negative 2. These are both over 1, so I end up with y equals 4 over negative 2 is negative 2x, plus negative 8 over negative 2 is 4. So there's my equation, so that means my slope is negative 2 over 1, and my y-intercept is 4. So that makes my starting point 4, my y-intercept, and my slope tells me to go down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, etc., etc. Connect my dots. So that is slope-intercept form, okay? Getting it into slope-intercept form and how it can help you graph.